Just a few days ago, Keir Starmer was confidently advancing a bold plan to implement significant cuts to the UK's welfare system. However, mounting political pressure has forced him into a dramatic retreat. What began as a firm policy initiative has undergone an abrupt reversal. Over 120 MPs from his own party came close to triggering a full-blown leadership crisis. The key question now is, what caused this sudden shift, and what impact will it have on the country's most vulnerable citizens? In what is being seen as one of the most serious internal revolts since he took office, the Prime Minister has been compelled to substantially revise his welfare reform proposal. Following weeks of growing unrest within Labour ranks, Starmer has scrapped his attempt to cut £5 billion from the UK's benefit system, concessions he had previously refused to even consider. Initially, Starmer dismissed the concerns of more than 120 Labour rebels as little more than background noise. But as tensions escalated in Westminster, his stance began to soften. By Friday morning, Downing Street was operating under pressure, and a government spokesperson was deployed to confirm that the Prime Minister had made 3 key concessions in a bid to stave off what could have been a politically devastating rebellion. This was not a minor internal dispute. It was the sort of confrontation that can ignite leadership challenges. At the heart of the storm was Labour's proposal to slash personal independence payments, PIP, and tighten the eligibility criteria for universal credit, a move that could have directly affected up to 800,000 individuals, many of whom live with disabilities or serious health conditions. The Prime Minister's intention was to rein in soaring welfare costs, but many, both within and outside Parliament, viewed the proposal as a direct assault on the most disadvantaged. The backlash from within his own party was swift and forceful. Vicky Foxcroft, one of Labour's whips, resigned in protest, while 126 MPs formally supported a reasoned amendment opposing the plans. Among them was Dame Meg Hillier, chair of the Treasury Select Committee, who led the charge that ultimately forced Starmer to concede. In the early hours, Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall circulated a letter to Labour MPs outlining the revised plan. It guaranteed that current PIP recipients would remain unaffected, while new claimants from November 2026 onwards would face stricter eligibility standards, though transitional protections would be included to ease the shift. Most notably, a full ministerial review of the PIP assessment process was announced, to be developed in collaboration with disabled individuals and relevant advocacy groups. This was a carefully crafted retreat, intended to diffuse internal tensions without appearing as a full capitulation. And for some within the party, the strategy paid off. Dame Hillier described the outcome as a workable compromise, praising the leadership for listening to both MPs and the wider public. However, not everyone was satisfied. Veteran MP Clive Lewis, a prominent figure on the party's progressive wing, criticized the compromise as little more than a face-saving maneuver, pointing to the absence of a proper impact assessment and the lack of meaningful input from disabled voices from the outset. He pledged to vote against the plan. Likewise, Richard Bergen, a staunch socialist and former ally of Jeremy Corbyn, argued that the revised proposal would still plunge hundreds of thousands into poverty. In his view, tweaking the edges of a deeply unjust policy is not reform, but betrayal. Criticism also came from beyond Labour's own ranks. The Conservative Party, still reeling from a bruising electoral defeat, seized the opportunity to attack. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride labelled the U-turn as yet another entry in what he described as a growing catalogue of policy reversals, accusing Starmer of abandoning fiscal responsibility in an attempt to appease his base. Conservative MP Helen Watt-Ely, a former welfare minister, was even more blunt, branding the climb down a humiliation. She argued that Labour had gone from a flawed plan to one that amounted to almost nothing, and warned that the revised policy risked establishing a two-tier welfare system that encourages long-term dependency rather than employment. But the political damage may already be done. Starmer's critics, both inside and outside his party, now see a leader who folds under pressure. A Prime Minister who talks tough on reform but retreats at the first sign of internal dissent. It's a dangerous perception, particularly for someone still in the early stages of his premiership. Worse still, this is not an isolated incident. Starmer has also walked back on major policy positions relating to winter fuel payments, university tuition fees, and the UK's stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Each reversal chips away at his image as a decisive leader, emboldens Labour's internal factions, and fuels ongoing speculation about his long-term political future. For now, he has managed to avoid a full-scale mutiny. But the episode has laid bare the fragility of the coalition he leads. Starmer must contend not only with a conservative opposition, but also with a Labour Party still deeply divided along ideological lines. The battle over welfare reform is far from over. The final legislation will face intense scrutiny in Parliament. And as political tensions continue to mount, one troubling question lingers. If this is how Starmer responds to pressure from within, how will he cope when the real tests come from beyond? In other news, the Labour Party is reportedly close to finalising a controversial migration deal with France. The proposed arrangement involves a one-in, one-out exchange system, which has already been labelled illogical by migration analyst Stephen Wolfe. According to various sources, the agreement, expected to be announced in the coming days, would see France accept the return of migrants who have crossed the English Channel, in exchange for the UK taking in an equal number of asylum seekers from processing centres on French soil. Stephen Wolfe, head of the Centre for Migration Studies, has voiced strong opposition to the proposal. In his view, the logic behind the system is fundamentally flawed. It assumes that if someone is denied asylum at an official centre in Paris or Lille and still chooses to cross the Channel illegally, they will simply be sent back. However, in reality, many migrants will continue trying until they eventually succeed. This is already evident in the estimated 5,000 people each year who reach the UK by hiding in lorries. Such migration routes existed well before Brexit, under the former Dublin II regulations, and continue to operate today. Under that framework, the UK was technically allowed to return asylum seekers to France if they had previously applied there. But in practice, the outcome was heavily unbalanced, with Britain taking in 4 times more people from France than it successfully sent back. Wolfe further warned that the new plan could effectively serve as a green light for human smuggling networks to keep operating. He argued that it merely shifts their activities into formal processing channels, allowing the crisis to appear more controlled in the media, while doing little to address the core issue. He added that the only truly effective way to stop illegal channel crossings is by creating a credible deterrent in the destination country, supported by a legal system that puts an end to endless appeals. In his view, any deal with France should have included a clear condition: no one arriving by boat across the Channel would be accepted. Wolfe also stated that the UK should withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights, repeal the Human Rights Act, and implement a new legal framework rooted in British common law to close existing loopholes. These gaps, he said, allow people to remain in the country based on what he described as absurd claims, such as having their beard cut against their will, or their child not liking chicken McNuggets in Albania. According to Wolfe, such cases have been cited by the European Court as breaches of human rights. As an additional measure, he suggested the UK should work alongside countries like the United States to push for a structural reform of the UN Refugee Convention, narrowing its application strictly to those genuinely fleeing torture or persecution, rather than individuals seeking economic opportunities. So far this year, more than 18,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel, the highest number ever recorded for this point in the year since official data collection began in 2018. This represents a 43% increase compared to the same period last year. Under the proposed system, the UK would accept migrants for reasons such as family reunification while returning others to France. Do you think this one-for-one deal is a viable solution or just a temporary fix for a much deeper crisis? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to stay up to date with the most important stories from across the UK. See you in the next video.